Welcome back, listeners, and for those of you just joining, you found yourself a little portal into the world of the Bethnal Archives. My name is Felix, and I am the head archivist here. Today I'm giving you an overview of the Bethnal Archives themselves, who are our staff, and also I'll be introducing two new podcasters who I work with on a daily basis who will be contributing to this wonderful channel Joe the Intern has created. We're broadcasting in a sense from deep below the streets of London, hidden in a labyrinthine vault of old knowledge and older shadows. The archives aren't some dusty basement of relics and records. They're something like a second city beneath the city, a place where what doesn't belong in the world above can be catalogued, studied, and, when necessary, contained. I've been here most of my life, and I suppose you could say the archives themselves are as familiar to me as the back of my hand. Oh, that's a new mole? Little joke. The archive isn't a single room, or even a set of neatly stacked hallways. It's a network of floors, chambers, stretching further down than most would believe. We occupy a corner of Bethnal Green, though you wouldn't know it from the outside. Just a nondescript door behind a row of shops, mostly forgotten. An iron door that won't budge unless you have the right key, and even then it's not so straightforward. If you're meant to enter, you'll find your way. The archives themselves are divided into floors, each floor dedicated to a different category of phenomena, though in a place like this, categories are often mere suggestions. On one of the top floors, we keep our more innocuous finds, Class 1, Class 2 cases, normally harmless spectral sightings, objects with particular but safe histories. Floors further down are where things get complicated. The lowest floors are where we store Class 6 and above, malevolent entities, dimensional artifacts, and the odd cursed relic that refuses to be classified. Day-to-day operations, though, are far from as neat as those classifications might imply. We don't start the day by pulling files into a simple sequence. We're more likely to spend it extinguishing proverbial fires. Every morning I take stock of new items Virgil's brought in overnight. Virgil, of course, our freelance field agent. You might have heard some of his other stories here on the channel. He was known to drag in the strangest finds. Recently he brought in an old mirror from an abandoned flat in Shoreditch that was giving people strange dreams just by walking past it. Turns out it was a Victorian witch glass used for warding off spirits. Simple case really, but one that needed the right touch to neutralize. After a quick sweep by Rue Fennick, our security specialist, and a series of containment charms, we moved it to one of our upper floors, filed it away, and made sure it couldn't cause any more trouble. Of course, then there's Dr. Imogen Grant, she's a character, who often begins her day at dawn down in the lab. Imogen's our fully trained pathologist in animals and humans. She's the one who dissects whatever peculiar biological remains come our way, determining if we're dealing with an animal, a cryptid, or maybe something else entirely. Last week she spent 3 days on what we initially thought was a particularly large batch from one of Virgil's nocturnal expeditions, only to find out it had vestigial hands. A remnant, perhaps, of something much older and more unsettling. And that brings us to categorization, a daily necessity, though not one we take lightly. Our case classification system is our lifeline, though it is a bit of an evolving beast. We've divided cases into types based on threat levels and types of supernatural phenomena. There are 7 main classes, from Class 1 being benign phenomena, like your friendly spectres and residual hauntings, all the way up to Class 7, which we classify as unimaginable due to their unpredictability. We keep those ones under strict lock and key, and for good reason. They're stored far down behind every ward and seal we can manage. Anything that defies standard containment measures ends up down there, guarded by layers of magic iron and bureaucracy. Yes, the bureaucracy. Let me tell you, for every haunting or cursed artifact that ends up in the archives, there's a stack of paperwork thick enough to choke a ghost. Each item is tagged, cross-referenced, stored within a record of its classification, its origin, its containment instructions. I spend hours every week dealing with government forms, often redacted to the point of absurdity, though they insist on them as part of the process. And it's not just government forms. We're also bound by agreements with local and international organisations. Of course, there's the council, called the Metropolitan Advisory Board on Paranormal Activity, MAPPA for short, and they require quarterly reports. Each report is a bureaucratic maze of clearances, classifications and signatures. Even the Met Police have officers assigned to the archives, making sure we follow protocol. Not that they're always helpful. The police presence down here is relatively new, to be honest. There was a time when we managed without much oversight. Back when the exorcists were an entirely separate faction. Collection of priests, mystics, and spiritualists with their own methods. They'd come down here to borrow items, cross-reference cases, or consult on particularly troublesome exorcisms. We worked alongside them, back when they saw us as allies rather than merely an extension of government red tape. But then things changed. Cases became more violent, and after a series of uncontained hauntings in East London, the Met insisted on a more formal arrangement. Now we have what we call the police priests. They are part of the Metropolitan Police's occult branch, of course highly secret, and they are trained at the Vatican. They are armed with blessed firearms, doused in holy oil. They are our first line of defense in high-risk incidents, and they are not to be trifled with. Rue works closely with them to ensure our containment procedures are up to standards. It's not the perfect arrangement. While they are useful when cases call for brute force, they're less keen on the subtleties of cataloguing and research, which makes them wary of the archives operations. Then, of course, there's our Global Affairs Officer, Edward Warrington. He's another key player. You'll be hearing from him, I think, possibly tomorrow. Though he's rarely seen on the ground, Edward monitors paranormal events outside the UK, and his office is a world of its own. A fortress of classified files, global threat maps, and red-inked notes on foreign incidents that might drift into our jurisdiction. Edward is our silent guardian against the international supernatural crisis, and he's the one who tips us off to any intercontinental connections. A haunting in Paris may link back to a relic stored in Edinburgh, or a possession in the Philippines may link to some ritualistic pattern that we could use here for something we've got going on. Edward keeps those pieces together and lets us know when to be on guard. As for me, well, my history is tangled up into the archives themselves. I joined nearly 3 decades ago, fresh from university and convinced I'd be documenting Victorian architecture. I must admit it was a bit of a shock to learn that the architecture was the least of it. My first case was a small one. I do remember it like it was yesterday. The kind we categorize as Class 2, harmless but reoccurring sighting of a woman in grey. It was a simple phantom lingering at a boarding house, there in Limehouse itself, harmless enough, but there was something about her that seemed to me to be waiting. It was my introduction to the archives, a peculiar blend of mystery and melancholy, and it was from that moment I was hooked. Back then things were simpler. The archives weren't as vast, not as complex, and entities we dealt with felt smaller. Over the years, however, the world outside has darkened. The cases have grown bolder, and with this shift, the archive has had to evolve, which means more staff, more containment protocols, and far more paperwork. I spend hours some nights, pen in hand, filling out forms for cases, making sure every box is checked so no bureaucrat can come down and question our methods. It is tiresome but necessary. You see, one loose end, one forgotten form, and we're answering to the higher-ups. And then what happens? We'll lose our independence. And let's not forget about the cases themselves, the very heart of what we do. You want stories? Oh, we have countless. There was, of course, the Mudlark Brick Lane, a malicious entity that crawled its way out of the Thames and nearly took Virgil with it. Class 7, I believe, with traces of Victorian vengeance so deep it still troubles Virgil's dreams. Then there was the Phantom Carriage of Whitechapel, a spectral vehicle that would appear out of nowhere, dragging its unwilling victims into an ethereal fog. That one, believe it or not, was a joint operation with the police priests, their blessed firearms managing to slow it down long enough for the exorcisms to perform their rites. I don't think I've actually told this one on the podcast. That's one for the future for sure. And then of course there's the Red Orbs of Covent Garden. That was a temporal rupture. Class 5. The orbs would drift down alleyways, leading those who followed them into a forest that shouldn't exist. A place where time seemed to stretch and fracture. We did manage to finally contain them, but not before a few poor souls had lost days, even weeks to the impossible wood. The archives are a place of vigilance. Each of us has a part to play. The day starts with cataloguing, of course, yes, but there is also maintenance. Every floor must be checked. The wards have to be tested. Containment spells refreshed. Of course, then there's the usual stuff like fire alarms, PPE, and all of that lovely stuff. Eliza works in the archives' shadowed reading rooms, combing through folklore to trace any links to new cases. Her expertise has saved us more than once, piecing together connections that our classifications might alone overlook, and Rue ensures that all the physical barriers are secure. Of course, then there's our wonderful intern Joe. Hey Joe, he's just looking at me now, who made this podcast impossible. He handles digitizing our older records and ensures we have backups of everything. He's taken on this project of broadcasting our stories to you, the outside world, and as reluctant as I was to agree to it, I'm starting to see the appeal. Maybe you'll sleep a little sounder knowing that someone, somewhere, is watching in the shadows. And so, dear listeners, this is our world. Day to day, down here in the depths of the Bethnal Green Archives, we work in the dim glow of old bulbs, our breaths mingling with the dust of centuries, our minds on whatever new cases lurk out of sight. The archives are vast, but they're also, in their own way, a sanctuary. Each artifact, each haunting, each document we add to our shelves, it is a reminder of the strange and enduring nature of humanity. It's easy to forget with all the routine and red tape that there is a purpose to our work, a reason we catalogue, classify and contain. We're here to keep the balance, to make sure what lurks beneath doesn't rise up too far, and perhaps, as Joe insists, there's something reassuring in sharing this work with you, knowing that the archives don't stand alone. So stay tuned in, stay curious, and if you're over in East London and you feel a prickle on the back of your neck, it's likely nothing. But perhaps, just perhaps, it's something waiting to be archived. Of course, don't forget, please follow, subscribe, like, even comment. All of them things keep us invigorated in creating more content and let us know that you listeners at home are enjoying. I've got quite a busy week, so I won't probably be back till next week. However, I've heard that Edward has been doing some fantastic podcasts with Joe, and also Dr. Imogen has done her very first podcast talking about some of the things that she dissects down in the lab. So they sound great, and I'll be definitely tuning in as well to listen to them. Until next time, I'll see you later.